Oh, good morning, ladies, gentlemen, and others. Stephen Jay Gould famously quipped that he was less concerned with the convolutions of Einstein's brain than he was with the high probability that people of equal talent, or at least near equal talent, had lived and died in obscurity, working in the cotton fields, the mines, and the factories of America. He was commenting, of course, on segregation and the endemic racism of America, which relegated people of a darker complexion to a life of exclusion, poverty, illiteracy, and persecution. Let's call it what it is, persecution. And this is a fact of life. The ancient Romans took Syracuse and killed Archimedes, a man of incredible intelligence. And 2,000 years later, the German Third Empire, the Third Reich, took some of their most brilliant doctors and scientists, and military strategists, engineers, aircraft designers, and tank designers, and loaded them onto cattle cars, transported them to Poland, and put them to work as forced labor in beet fields and turnip fields on half rations, where many of them starved to death. The Soviet Union did the same thing with their conspiracy of doctors in order to eliminate people who were seen as a threat. Joseph Stalin and Latimer Beria hatched a scheme to massacre all the intellectuals in the Soviet Union. And they had started the project when, mercifully, the Stalin and Beria era was brought to an abrupt and bloody end. Today, here in Canada, intelligent people are kept from higher education by the sheer cost of doing so. The expense of going to university is simply prohibitive, and so people who could be medical researchers end up, well, flipping burgers at a chain restaurant. Because they just can't afford it. And they're not good at sports, so they can't get a sports scholarship. So what do? Well, they flip burgers for the rest of their lives. Capitalist democracy is not about merit. It is about money. It is about wealth. And it is also very much, until recently, very much about the color of one's skin. This is less of an issue today, but still very much an issue. But yes, capitalist democracy is still very much concerned with how much money you have, rather than what your abilities are. Far from being a meritocracy. Capitalist democracy is a whole series of walls, a whole series of obstacles at which the rich are gently lifted up and over, and the poor are forced to fight their way through. Capitalist democracy. But of course, any time that you have an absolutist ideology, you have the death of meritocracy. Capitalist democracy is just one example. Its inevitable offshoot, fascism, is another. And, well, whenever you have one person with absolute power, backed by a very small cadre of paranoid hysterics, and yes, I just described the Stalin era, you have the exact same problem. Merit goes out the window. The ability to properly kiss ass to those above you is the only virtue. Yeah. So we have a society where you have to kiss ass just to stay afloat. Never mind to get out of the sewer, but to stay afloat, you have to kiss ass to the people above you. Because otherwise you're allowed to sink. You're allowed to drown in the system. And yes, it is almost impossible, unless you have the right connections, to succeed at anything in the world of capitalist democracy. It is nearly impossible. I was lucky enough to make the right connections, to meet the right people. And yes, knowing somebody who's rich does have incredible benefits when you're poor. Because facts and reality don't matter to the system. It's how much money you have, and if you don't have money, which rich people do you know, if you know any? And if you don't know any rich people, well, you're fucked. Because capitalist democracy. And this is the hard capitalism, the rugged individualism that was praised by Ayn Rand and developed into a supposedly academic thesis by Milton Friedman before being run with by Ronald Reagan, Brian Mulroney, and Margaret Thatcher to create the 1980s, an era from which we have still not recovered. And it is now 2023, it's late 2023, it's August, coming up on September. And we're still struggling to recover from the 80s, from Reaganomics, from the introduction or reintroduction of hard capitalism. And as the system becomes increasingly cruel, the people who believe in the system also become increasingly cruel. We see this with Trump supporters. We see this with people who want to bring back Stephen Harper and make him president for life here in Canada. We see this with the people who want to kill Justin Trudeau simply because he's a liberal, and who believe every bit of propaganda churned out by the Americans and the Russians and the Chinese that is being used to demonize him. Justin Trudeau is literally the first Canadian Prime Minister to be at serious risk of assassination. And why? Well, because foreign interests want to replace him with somebody who's more to their taste. Somebody who's more like a generalissimo. Somebody who will be their El Presidente in Canada. Somebody who can be controlled from Richmond, Virginia. Yes. And we all know what's in Richmond, Virginia, don't we? Yeah. Yeah. The destruction of merit as a virtue and its replacement with simple wealth. The having of money, or the having access to people who have money, is the only virtue that remains. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? Honestly, what do you do with that? Hard capitalism. Don't kid yourself. It's being brought in. And no, you will not be one of the billionaire class. You will not be lifted up to the ranks of power and privilege. Despite your belief to the contrary, you do not have a rich uncle in Texas who's coming to make you the CEO of his company. You live in poverty, you're going to die in deeper poverty, if not outright debt. Because that's what the system is geared towards now. Debt is a commodity. And debt feeds the gross national product. The more debt you have, the better your gross national product. So by getting everybody in debt, it supposedly helps the economy. Of course, it does help the rich, the obscenely rich. But again, with hard capitalism, the proletariat get nothing. As always in capitalism, we, the workers, the common people, we do not benefit. No matter how hard we are told to work, we're not going to gain anything. Now we can kiss ass to the billionaires all day, and all it will do is give us dirty lips. We will not benefit from hard capitalism. If you're making less than $500,000 a year, you don't count. We don't count. And merit does not count. Morality does not count, as we have seen with the Church of Trump. Morality does not count. So what does count in hard capitalism? Well, being rich. And it doesn't matter how you get rich. As long as, if you do it by killing people, by drugging people, by exploiting people directly, your hands aren't the dirty ones. You just inherited the wealth from a father who was a drug dealer, a pimp, a gangland enforcer, or whatever. You inherit your wealth from somebody who was a violent criminal. You're home free. Because you can whitewash the ever-living shit out of your family once you inherit that wealth. Hard capitalism. Hard capitalism. With no mitigating socialist influence whatsoever to keep the worst excesses in check. This is what you want. This is what you get. Anywho, good morning.